Hello, my name is Leila, and I will be discussing the piece Destruction of the Father by Louise Bourgeois. So I think we can all agree that art can and often is something to be admired, explored, and enjoyed. I think it is quite easy to do this, but I believe that as artists, we understand that a successful piece of art may not, and often will not, make you feel any type of joy. This is not to say that it isn't to be appreciated. To have a negative impression of an artwork can be just as important. I feel people seldom create art for themselves anymore, because without the insight from others, what confirmation is there that it is anything at all? However, some artists really go against this instinctual regime to please an audience, one in particular being Louise Bourgeois. Her work has always explored dark and conceptual constructs, death and the unconscious, sexuality and the body, domesticity and the family. Now, Destruction of the Father is a piece surrounding this idea that I will be discussing today. When I first came across this piece, it instantly gave me a sense of doom. This gory, unaesthetic scene that dares you to look closer. At first, it almost appears two-dimensional, with its wooden-like frame. But as you step closer, it becomes 3D. And after you understand the backstory, it is four-dimensional. It is immediately separating from the exhibition it is held in. This secret room placed inside a wall. It felt like a mold growing somewhere it shouldn't. And I found myself feeling like an interruption, a rude accessory that did not fit to this savage criminal world. The conceptual story behind this piece is one of a dark and not very humorous nature. It is shown to be the ruins of a cannibalistic feast of a father's remains after his wife and children have eaten him. It is a fantasy of revenge against an overbearing father. Now, this installation piece was built shortly after Bourgeois' husband's own death. I believe this opened old wounds for her, as her relationship with her own father was fragile and tainted due to his chauvinistic character and his unfaithful habits to her mother. Bourgeois was always very close with her mother and cared for her for numerous years as she suffered with many health issues. When she died in 1932, Louise was just 22 years old. She attempted suicide that year. As the weight from her mother's death and her father's emotionless reactions really took its toll, a fear of abandonment can be seen throughout many of her works that spurred from this. Now, many people will say that these types of pieces are never as thought out as they claim to be, but I believe that to create such an incentive for an art piece really disregards any half-hearted, fleeting feelings. The artistic process in which one goes to create such a moving installation is not one to be done lightly. Every part must be undone and redone to create this perfect view of her thoughts. Here we can see this disturbing yet intriguing display presenting a dining room scene in which a table is shown to be crowded with reminiscences of fake human flesh. 24 breast-shaped domes are an audience to this setting. The confessional installation piece was built with wood, plaster, fabric, and latex. Now, these materials are undeniably very contrasting. Fabric and latex, two things used for clothing, yet so different in appearances and associations. I see fabric as a soft, loving, and warming material, and latex as cold, hard, and overtly sexual. Now, this contrast to me really outlines her contradicting thoughts. For the fake human flesh, Bourgeois bought chunks of mutton and cast them in plaster. She then covered this plaster with rubber. Now, she could have obviously easily saved herself the gory process of handling real meat. But I think she knew that to create such a gruesome incentive for a story, she really had to approach this with the same horrible attitude. We can see here that the material really does end up appearing like human skin. Its textured, yellowy surfaces fold and crease, embellishing a sense of distortion, as if the entire piece is one massive, disjointed form of a person. But as the red show lights turn on, the familiarity to a human is quickly discarded. We are now less inclined to pity the dead father. He is no longer human. He is now a rare delicacy, ready to be a feast. Evenly chopped and placed around the table so that his family may all take a considerable plate. This secret story, enclosed in this womb-like state, is the dramatic, theatrical crime scene that shares no sense of welcoming. It is uninviting and cold, untouchable. It separates us from this supposed immersive experience, as if to say this is not a shared incident, this is her thoughts alone, not to be emphasized with. Even the title of the piece, Destruction of the Father, emphasis on the and not a father, concluding that it is not a representation of a subjective parental figure. However, despite this, the reason I chose this piece was due to the likeness and the resonation I felt towards the title and art itself. I feel it is also important to mention that Destruction of the Father was, in my eyes, the precursor to her later art series, The Cells. One particular cell is Dangerous Passage. Now, these were intensely psychological microcosms situated within various enclosures, each arranged to evoke an atmosphere of emotional resonance. Dangerous Passage, produced in 1997, describes a passage of a young girl going through a story. As you walk through these passages, you are met with several cell-like rooms, each encaged in a closed home. Much like Destruction of the Father, this piece explores emphasizing enclosures. Each room displays an odd collection of furniture and objects. However, despite the strange appearances, I believe these rooms still somewhat harness a sense of living space. Both projects reflect a story of a young girl that she resonates with. This leads me to believe it is about her perspective as a young girl. And as she approaches every aspect with a child's eye, every unnecessary thought is discarded. All we are left with are the raw forms of her ideas, molded together to create these intentions. And I think this brings a revealing and vulnerable side to her intense work. Now, later in her life, Bourgeois produced a book titled Destruction of the Father, Reconstruction of the Father, which contains formal texts and pen thoughts. She suggests that the inspiration for Destruction of the Father arose from a childhood fantasy in which her family at a dinner table, tiring of hearing her father's ignorant boastings, dismembers and cannibalizes him, thus pushing and tipping the power struggle for authority from her father's grasp to Bourgeois and her siblings. An argument has been fought and won within this piece. In this book is also a quote that I feel important to share by Louise, stating, "In order to stand unbearable family tension, I had to express my anxieties in forms that I could change, mold, and rebuild." Now, I think transforming an emotional pain into a physical one is an act that I think we as humans all use as a coping response to any sort of trauma. To be able to find and hold such sensitivity can give us a profound sense of power over our feelings and ourselves. I believe many artists use this tool, and in the process, unknowingly, create something beautiful, beautiful, destructive art. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Leila, for that presentation. Here's a question for you. How much do you think we need to know about Louise Bourgeois herself and her history to respond to her work?
I think, of course, it depends on the artwork. I think some are very visually provoking and you might understand a lot of it already. But I think pieces like that are quite aesthetically challenged, let's say, and I think these need some kind of conceptual story behind the piece to really enjoy the full thing and get the most out of it. And I think that's very important.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.